Deleted session, July 16, 1977. Good evening. Now let us begin. Despite negative beliefs, false starts, or disappointments, Ruber's body has always tried to improve itself. The improvements were relatively isolated, kept apart from each other, not connecting overall, so that main motions could be affected. And despite your joint negativism and your joint distrust of improvements, and your joint insistence upon ignoring any improvements noted by Ruber as ludicrously insignificant in the face of what was needed, in spite of all of that, the body has kept up its own struggle. Do you want me to wait? Ra said no. They said just before the eye condition became apparent, the following happened. Some ligaments that had been shortened in the head and neck area began to lengthen. These ligaments control all motions, head movement, and have been in those turns largely responsible for holding Ruber in this position top-wise. This will be a rather comprehensive session, so take your time. As a result of that definite improvement, Ruber was able to lift his head slightly as he walked. We can wait if you want. Those ligaments had been pulled tightly. Only a small, minute alteration in any ligament or muscle affects all others. These ligaments in particular had been in the process of loosening before Ruber suddenly found he could thusly move his head and look up toward the ceiling while walking. Previous to that, he had held his head, neck, shoulders, and arms, using them almost as one block, allowing those motions necessary for typing and reading, with some additional motions possible for the few chores he managed to do. The beginning release of those ligaments affected muscles that had been thusly held, so that they also began a release. As a rule, muscles do not suddenly release an inch or two, and again, the smallest alteration is important. Ruber mentioned it to you, and noted it himself. Both of you promptly felt it to be quite insignificant, so Ruber could lift his head an inch while walking. Each of you thought, big deal. In fact, a significant improvement had begun, for those motions affected all others, beginning to stretch other muscles and ligaments, demanding more circulation, and so forth. Ruber's eyes had worked quite comfortably, moving in a very limited range of motion because of the tightened neck, head and shoulder muscles and ligaments. Simply put, the eyes worked while ducked into certain positions or focuses. He had noticed for some time before that he had difficulty rolling his eyes when they were closed, for example. As the heavy ligaments began to move, some important joints began to loosen. Many muscles, large and small, were tugged upon and teased into motion. He felt them in various portions of his body. The same happened to the eyes muscles, however, and those are important in vision. He started using them in ways he had not before. They were not in the old locked position, and he was beginning to enlarge his peripheral vision, which, though he did not know it, had previously been limited by the head motion. The eye strain began to show. He became frightened. The tenseness from his fear would alternately relax and tighten the muscles then. Give us a moment. There was also increased circulation to the eyes, very important, though this gave him a feeling of congestion at times. You were not having sessions during part of that period. He could not rely upon himself, and he did not trust the eye doctor. The bifocals were reseated. The eye muscles were trying to work. The bifocals were trying to do the work for the eyes. The worry and the additional tension caused by it prevented those ligaments and so forth from further improvement until now, period. Sometimes it seems to Matt that I cannot get through to either of you in certain areas, for it is precisely your ambiguity and feelings of distress that cut improvements short, and that aggravate any otherwise briefly experienced discomforts. That is, they become exaggerated and linger. Now, you are at this point presently. You can choose to believe me and to act upon what I tell you, or you can choose to ignore the implications of what I say. Ruber made a quiet or quietly dramatic decision. He is verbal. Words are important to him. He hit upon the word responsive in relationship to his body. He decided that above all, he now wanted his body to be responsive. That word and its meaning to him has the power to offset many of his negative body beliefs and projections. In the past 2 days, the following events have occurred. They have been largely ignored by both of you. Several large ligament areas have shown significant improvements in terms of release. I am speaking of the right neck area. The release of these ligaments, though not complete, brought about changes, such as the following: the activation of the entire capillary system, the increase of circulation to the ankles, and some observable increased motion in both. The ankles have not suddenly been completely released, but the necessary motions have begun. The opening of these capillaries was responsible for the itching feeling in both the ankles and, to a lesser extent, in the knees. Both of you distrusted those events. Ruber's eyes felt better, but both of you discounted that also as insignificant. They felt better because the muscles are becoming more used to their newer motions. They will constantly improve in all ways if you track the body's resources and intent. He can, for example, begin to copy material for, say, an hour a day. Before there was no trouble. That was all the eyes did, relatively speaking. In the body's reality, for example, today's improvements are quite momentous, but your joint attitudes in the past put the body's efforts down. Are you tired? Ra said no. They said again, part of this is the result of thinking in terms of absolutes. Any improvement in Ruber's condition is significant and should be reinforced. You are constantly in the position of saying to the body, in the face of what we want, your improvement, whatever it might be, is not only not enough, but almost a parody in the light of normal walking. In terms of behavior, neither of you reinforce positive behavior in terms of any improvement. You constantly say, in the light of the past, these improvements will come to nothing, and indeed are worse than none, for they only lead into false hopes. Ruber is embarrassed to mention an improvement to you, or to grant any as significant to himself. When he does break down and tell you of one, you often frown. Your joint attitudes are plain. Despite this, and because of your good intents, being about this group of sessions, the body is responding. You were in danger of following your old patterns of reaction, which is why I am giving this information. To some extent, all of Ruber's movable parts have, since the sessions lately began, become more pliable. He said he felt a trifle lighter on his feet. Again dismissed by both of you as insignificant. This was the result of increased circulation, but mainly the result of tensions being relieved in those important neck areas. That softening means that all of the muscles and ligaments involved in locomotion have somewhat loosened, an overall loosening. The position walking has not altered. It has become looser, however, and at times quicker. The overall motion is what is important. and the knee stiffness began in the neck areas. When you focus upon negatives, that is all you see. The idea of being physically responsive can further trigger the final important developments needed. Absolutes must be avoided, however, and you start from Ruber's present position, reinforcing through approval, not disapproval, those improvements as they happen. This entire attitude, of course, represents those areas where you have not made the leap from the worst beliefs, and you do feel betwixt and between. I have said before in the past that a given time was ripe for a change of a most beneficial nature. It does no good to ask why those advantages were not fully taken advantage of. In 1973, Ruber made definite and important strides. You can say that those strides were useless since they were not followed through to normal mobility. On the other hand, those strides were highly important, for the body derides itself to an important degree, and through all of the difficulty, the body has tried to right itself. The idea of responsiveness is vital, and its importance to Ruber, now that he has attached it to body motion, is extremely significant. You are another such period, where conditions are working for you. I want you to take advantage of them this time, and this session can allow you to do so. You believe the body can improve, or you don't. The fact that it constantly tries should tell you something. I cannot speak more clearly. Vital improvements have begun. You should see some increased mobility in terms of far quicker motions first of all, followed by a general overall straightening. It is basically so simple. That you projected difficulties upon me. You tread improvements, however slight they may appear. You approve of them. I believe I have answered all of your eyes' questions. The responsiveness, incidentally, covers a variety of issues, socially as well as physically. I have said what I set out to say, end of session, unless you have questions. Ralph said no. Say said, then a fond good evening, and take my advice, both of you. Try, for once, to tread that the best rather than the worst might happen, and that the improvements have a good intent in mind. Ralph said, all right, good night, Seth.